Recently, the war in Ukraine has hit its 600th day. The Ukrainian counterattack has been well underway since summer, having made limited territorial gains, but it appears to have faltered against the Russian defense. Behind the lines, Russia has been ramping up its bombing campaign, specifically against Ukraine's energy infrastructure. Despite Ukrainian optimism about their situation, the conflict appears to still be in deadlock, with many worried about how the Ukrainian state will weather through the upcoming winter. Things aren't all peachy for Russia, however. Since the start of the invasion up to this August, Russia has estimated to have suffered around 300,000 casualties. Back on the home front, political opposition has steadily grown against Putin's government, with an attempted coup occurring in June. Although a failure, the Wagner rebellion still highlighted the weakness of the Russian government to keep full control over its armed forces. All of this chaos and destruction brings up the question, why does Russia continue to fight? Such a massive conflict has many different causes, which I wouldn't be able to cover in the scope of this video. There are, however, unique aspects to this particular war that I will focus on, mainly the geopolitics of it. Let's begin with the geo half of this phrase, the geography. Europe is home to a large diversity of geographical features, from towering mountains to massive forests and rolling hills. One of these features is the Great European Plain, a flat expanse of land that stretches from the French coast to the Ural Mountains. Being able to serve as a natural highway for military campaigns, the plain is of immense strategic importance to European military powers, resulting in many of Europe's largest wars being fought on it. There is, however, no nation of which it is more important to than Russia. Russia has always viewed the Great European Plain as a national security risk. The plain remains relatively thin in Western Europe, but exponentially widens up in Eastern Europe, directly into the core heartland of Russia. This has historically made it easier for Western powers to invade Russia, a phenomenon that has occurred time and time and time again. Ever since its inception, one of Russia's key geostrategic goals has been to shift their territorial control as far west as possible in order to minimize the threat posed by an invasion along the Great Plain. The less of it they control, the more existential the security risk becomes, and there are few periods in Russian history where they have controlled as little of the plain as they do today. Now on to the second part of geopolitics, the political part. History has taught the Russians that whatever power occupies the western part of the plain should not be trusted. After the Second World War, Russia, now at this point the Soviet Union, was left as one of the two remaining powerful nations in the world, alongside the United States of America. Fearing Soviet hegemony over Europe, the United States created the military alliance known as NATO to directly combat Soviet aggression. From the Russian perspective, it appeared that another Western power had occupied the Great European Plain. As we all know, despite this tension, the ultimate showdown never came. The Soviet Union, through its Eastern European satellite states, were satisfied with their territorial control. They had anchored their borders against numerous natural barriers, and had narrowed down the European plain to a manageable front. It appeared that Russia had finally achieved the national security they had coveted for so long. Then everything fell apart. To say the 90s were chaotic for Russia is an understatement. In an attempt to save their influence, the Soviet Union loosened its control over their satellite states. But by 1992, the Union itself had collapsed, bringing into existence numerous new states. Russia itself underwent political turmoil and appeared militarily weak, leading many of these new states to align themselves with the West. By the 21st century, it was clear that Russia was no longer a major power. While they stagnated, NATO and US influence began to spread in the power vacuum. In the ensuing years, they expanded their membership towards many of the newly free states, all while encroaching ever eastwards on the Great European Plain. By 2014, Russia remained isolated and vulnerable. In this year, Ukraine underwent a political revolution, and seeking to improve its security standing, Russia initiated an attack. They invaded the Crimean Peninsula to secure their position in the Black Sea, and instigated revolts in eastern Ukraine with the goal of eventually expanding there. Russia had hoped that Ukraine would capitulate to their will, like Belarus had. Ukraine would choose to resist. During the next decade, Russia was faced with a declining population and an increasingly lacking military. Contrastly, Ukraine spent this time increasing their own strength and pursuing closer ties with the West. This, combined with the expansion of NATO, created a new security dilemma for Russia, who felt that by 2022, they had to strike Ukraine. The invasion was spurred by fears that Ukraine would join the European Union, and potentially NATO, making Russia's border on the Great European Plain unacceptably vulnerable. As of writing, it appears that Russia's military gambit may have backfired. In response to the war, Finland has officially joined NATO. Western interests have been mostly united behind supporting Ukraine, and Russia has lost nearly 100,000 of its dwindling young population. Through this lens of realist thinking, Russia's invasion appears understandable, maybe even justified. But the geopolitics are not the only factor in this war. Ukraine has a right to determine their own destiny, independent of Russia's subjugation. The Great European Plain has strategically mattered little since the dawn of the nuclear age. NATO only wants to contain foreign aggression, not enact their own. The war also ties into Vladimir Putin's pet project of resurrecting the Soviet Union, a completely unrealistic objective that would mean many more wars for Russia to come, some directly against NATO member states. This video has no intentions of supporting one side over another, but only to serve as a means of education, hopefully shedding some light on the rationality of the Russian arguments as to why they view the war in Ukraine as still being worth the fight.